Hey everyone, so before I start, do me a solid favor here. Like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel. Also, click on the links to find my content elsewhere outside of YouTube. You can find me at all your favorite audio and video podcast affiliates like iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, Radio Public. Um, I think I said Audible, right? Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify, Pandora, SiriusXM, to an extent with them. Anywhere basically there is a podcast to be found, you will find mine there as well. Also, guys, support and follow me over at rumble.com, vemo.com, and odyssey.com. Also, you can support me over at patreon.com. I got plans for that. I'll let you know very, very soon what those could be. Still figuring out exactly how, some people may accept what the idea is going to be, but I'll let you in on that soon. And also, guys, Super Chats will be open during the live chat. Live chat will be open if you want to come in and say hi during the premiere. And if you want to donate, it'd be greatly appreciated. And you can support me over at Venmo and Cash App as well. And let me drink some coffee because that's why I almost had a brain fart right there at the beginning. But anyway, let's get on to the topic here. And the topic basically is, you know, centering around last night's Wrestle Dream from St. Louis, AEW Wrestle Dream. And a lot of people look at it, with the exception of maybe the main event and, potentially, the Jurassic Express Young Bucks match and maybe even the world title match. A lot of people look at it outside of those three matches as mostly a glorified version of Dynamite, if not a glorified version of Collision. And, a lot of people, obviously the diehard fans of All Elite Wrestling, the hardcore wrestling fans in general that love all wrestling, and everything, but just primarily like the wrestling period and can, care less about story and everything. There are some people that will, come to its defense and say it was a great pay-per-view, that it was a great show and everything. And some people will even say that certain things that happened during the event, it's going to help elevate, this or that. Like with Mercedes, when she beat Mina Shirakawa to retain her TBS championship, but win the interim Ring of Honor Ring of Honor Women's Television Championship. A lot of people look at that and they're trying to say, oh, well, she's going to elevate that championship for Ring of Honor. She's going to, by having that, elevate Ring of Honor itself. And some people have to understand it doesn't matter who you put your championship on. If you're not going to promote that brand like you should be doing, I mean, Tony Khan has 2 hours on 2 nights, two what would be considered peripheral, easy for me to say, two peripheral nights of wrestling, Wednesday and Saturday. That's being, of course, if they're not having to be preempted or they decide, hey, we don't want to get our butts kicked, by WWE or we're being preempted because of this or that, that's another story. And they have to move to another night. But you get what I'm saying, right? They have two shows, primarily on Wednesday and Saturday nights that they could use throughout to promote Ring of Honor, but they don't. And the only time they promote it is when someone has a Ring of Honor championship or is a Ring of Honor champion showing up on that show and defending either that championship or defending a championship that, has the AEW branding. And if you're not promoting something like Ring of Honor, which a lot of people pretty much look at right now as AEW's developmental brand, their, answer to NXT or maybe Evolve, when you're not doing your best to promote that, then that's troubling. That's troubling to a lot of folks. But yet you have fans that are coming out and saying Mercedes winning the interim Ring of Honor Ring of Honor Women's Television Championship is going to help elevate that title and the brand. But they don't know that. They don't know that because of the fact that, they don't see the bigger picture. You see, I think a lot of people have said this before about the fans, about the diehards, the hardcore diehard wrestling fans that love all wrestling, including WWE, but mostly, like I said earlier, primarily the wrestling. The one thing that, some people I'm sure have said about them, but hasn't been said enough, is, as I just said, they're not seeing the bigger picture because they just want wrestling. And the reason they want the wrestling, if you will, is because they want it to be, on that level that UFC's on. They want it to be, where it's discussed on ESPN and Fox Sports, FS1, and all that. Like, okay, now on to the next subject of our sporting newscast. Let's talk about the pro wrestling of AEW, and show you the highlights of some of these great wrestling matches. That's what they want. That's what they want. But they're not going to come out and say it, because they know if they say it, people are going to laugh at them. People are going to point fingers at them and be like, seriously? That's why you're so hardcore for AEW to just focus on the wrestling and all that. You just want it on ESPN, as a highlight, or Fox Sports as a highlight. That's what's going to happen, and in my opinion, they know that. They know that's going to happen, and they don't want it to happen, because if it does, it makes them look, not just humiliated, but it humbles them. It humbles them to the point that they may have to come out and say, okay, look, we get wrestling is more than just pro wrestling, the stuff happening in the ring, we get that. But we just love the sporting aspect. That's all we care about. And we want it to be treated as an equal, legit sport. And here's the thing, a lot of people understand that. There are those in WWE that understand it. There are those everywhere else that understand it. AEW, mostly, more than likely, understand that. TNA understands it. MLW, you name it. All these places understand that they have not just a niche audience that just wants the wrestling, to be, focused on and be treated like a legit sport, equally to the likes of mixed martial arts and boxing and all that. Not only do they understand they have that niche fan base, but they know that on their rosters they have wrestlers, men and women, that feel the same way. But here's the difference, though. Sometimes, a wrestling promotion like, let's say, a WWE or an MLW or a TNA, they take their, well, I wouldn't say wake, but they basically take their talent aside, and they let them know, hey, we get you want to just be wrestling, and that's the primary thing that you've always been wanting to do, and that's great. But here's the inside about what pro wrestling really is about. They give them basically, they basically give them, the history, if you will. They kind of get them, they kind of give them the history of the differences of what a pro wrestling, of what wrestling companies are, when one just focuses on primarily pro wrestling, and what makes one successful if it focuses not just on pro wrestling, but also focuses on the story aspect as well. And to me, that's what a lot of people are getting very, very confused. A lot of hardcore fans that just want to focus on the primary wrestling. They don't understand that you need more than that, to have a successful business. And if you're going to have a successful show that basically right now, ratings wise, viewership wise, is not doing so well on cable television, as well as maybe even streaming via HBO Max, if you have a show that's not doing so well and everything, it's because of the fact that it's primarily focusing on that one niche. It needs to focus on being more than that. It needs to get back to the storytelling aspect of everything. It needs to get back to basically saying, the reason this match is happening is because this happened, and here's why it happened, and go from there. And AEW has a lot of potential to do that. They have a lot of potential to do that. I mean, it's seemingly they're starting something now, or are basically they're in the beginning stages, of starting something with Samoa Joe and Hangman Adam Page, which could pay off with Joe getting the AEW World Title, at Full Gear, and maybe holding it for a month and then dropping it back to Page, or maybe to Darby Allin. But the point is, you got something there. You have something there to where Joe has this belief that Hangman's not the champion that this company needs, that he is. That, Hangman's not a fighting champion. He's not a legit champion. He is, and that's kind of a good groundwork to start with this kind of a story, or with that kind of a story. Basically, you got the genesis of it starting up right now between them, to where Joe basically feels that the reason, AEW will not give someone like him a run with the championship again, or for the first time, is because they know he is the kind of champion that no matter who you throw at them, he'll show not only is he the badass that he is, but he is more legitimate and more real as a champion than someone like a Hangman Adam Page. Now, with that said, and everything, you take a look, you take a look at that, and then you take a look at, let's say, what's going on with Jurassic Express, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, the Don Callis family. You have something there, and as I've alluded to before, the one thing they have there with, like, let's say, Kenny Omega and the Don Callis family is it's right there in the middle. It's right there front and center. This whole thing with Callis is not just about building a faction, pretty much building his own promotion within AEW with all these members across the board, but primarily at its heart, it's about him wanting to get back at Kenny Omega. It's about him wanting Kenny Omega to realize that Kenny needs him more than he needs Kenny, and all that. Basically, he wants to bring Kenny in to be the figure piece, the headpiece of the Don Callis family. Thus, they can have the world title contender, in their, in their possession and everything. Basically, Don Callis wants things to go back to the way they were, and Kenny doesn't want that. But maybe there's something in there to where Kenny does want it, but he doesn't want Don to have to rely on basically breaking the rules or taking shortcuts and everything. Just accept things as they are. Again, you have a story there that at its heart basically focuses on and can be resolved easily on Omega and Callis. That's where the heart of the story is. But they're not focusing on that just yet. And they need to. If they want people to go into 2026 that are right now criticizing them for all the miscalculations they've been making throughout the year, then they need to start focusing on getting at the heart of this story, as well as making sure the story they got with Joe and Hangman gets people invested, gets them interested in what they bring to the table going into 2026. That's what they need to do. That's what they need to do. And you get the same thing with the women here. It's like I said in the video or in the audio video earlier. Yeah, everybody pretty much has a right to fear that Mercedes is going to win number 12, if not number 13, because I think she's supposed to face Jody Threat tonight for her championship for the promotion she's champion of, women's champion of. And it's obvious to a lot of people that's going to be number 12. So whether that happens or not, or the AEW World Title is number 12, people, again, as I said in the audio video, you can't blame them, for being afraid, for being, fearful of what potentially could happen, in the long run. You can't blame them because they're seeing this matchup being, made official, or pretty much will be made official for Full Gear, where it could be title for title, it could be for the world title, just like it All In. And they're afraid that it's going to go Mercedes' way because they're already promoting and touting the fact on television that Chris Statlander has never beaten Mercedes. Now, some could come out and say, well, that means Chris is going to win. Yeah, that's, here's the thing. That does sound like, that does sound like the direction they're going in. I'm trying to find the right word to say. That does sound like the direction they're going in. But the issue is this is not just anybody Chris Statlander's going in the ring with. If she was going in the ring against Mina Shirakawa, or she was going in the ring against Penelope Ford, or she was going in the ring with Sky Blue, people would say, yeah, Statlander's going to win. No big deal. But this is not any of them. This is Mercedes. This is the former Sasha Banks. This is someone that has pretty much been, accused, not just, rumor-wise or, report-wise and everything through various wrestling sources like Fightful, but, also on camera, evidently, and, from experience-wise, by people like JD from NY206 of Off the Script, whether you like him or not. This is a woman that has a lot of pull based on her name value, based on where she's been, and she's using that to get what she wants no matter where she goes. And again, people could say, well, maybe she doesn't want these titles, and they're just giving them to her because of a name value. And that might be the case, but if that's the case, why doesn't she just say, no, I don't want to win it, let me win the match, but let me win it by DQ, or let me win it by countout, or something, or have it go to a draw. But as far as we've seen, none of that has happened. And she's coming out, as everybody's pointed out, and even I've pointed out, she's coming out with these championships, like trophies, like, hey, this is what I've conquered and everything. Who's next? And now she's got the interim Ring of Honor Women's Television Championship. With if that means anything to anybody, and apparently it doesn't if you ask certain people. But still you have this woman in Mercedes that pretty much has been overall accused of using her creative pool, her creative say. She's even admitted herself on TMZ, about a year ago, to get what she wants. And this is why they're fearful she's going to become women's champion in full gear. They're fearful that's going to happen, and that pretty much is going to kill the division. That's pretty much going to kill the division. And to me, like I said in the audio video, they have something here that they could work with when it comes to Statlander. They could have Statlander go out on Dynamite this Wednesday on the post Wrestle Dream edition of Dynamite. They can have her come out, confront Mercedes, and do a work shoot pipe bomb on her and call her out for using her creative control, for using her political pull backstage, not just in AEW, but all over to get what she wants because she's too afraid to do it legitimately, one-on-one. She's afraid that if she has to go, into the match, without anything in her advantage or knowing, hey, this is the outcome that's going to happen, she's afraid, she'll lose. And to me, that's a story right there because you will have someone in Statlander who I believe they've shown signs of it already with her turning down the Death Riders and all that. They've shown signs of the fact that this girl could be, what is needed. She could be that outspoken, rebellious individual that basically doesn't just not take crap from anybody, if you will, but basically will tell it like it is. And I feel that is what's needed for this to actually work, to get people invested. So if you have her on Wednesday come out and do that, do a pipe bomb, do a work shoot on Mercedes, call her out for her political pull and everything, her creative control, and even maybe point out that the only reason she's doing this is to make herself look good so that her former employer in Connecticut will take her back and put her on that pedestal she hopes to be put on. If you have Statlander do that, and let's say Mercedes does agree to it, or, to an extent, let's say she does agree to it, that right there can get people invested. Or if you just say, hey, you tell Mercedes, hey, Chris is going to say something tonight, just be ready for it. And then Chris comes out and then she does that and kind of takes Mercedes off guard. Again, that gets people invested and it gets people talking about your company because obviously the reports will come out that Mercedes didn't see that coming, but hopefully she'll be talked to, and everything, or she'll be talked to afterwards and told this is all part of building to your match with her and Statlander, and it's to get basically a lot of the criticism people have been saying about you out in the open, and basically, you being the heel to come out and just, finally admit that, yeah, you know what, Statlander, what you said about a week or two ago, it's true. Yes, I am using my creative control. Yes, I am using my political pool because I can do whatever I want. I'm Mercedes Monet. I can do what I want, because of who I am and what I've been or where I've been. You can have that be the response from Mercedes maybe a week or two, maybe that same night or a week or two later. And again, it gets people invested. It gets people interested to want to see the match because now, you could have Statlander, throughout the build, challenge her to go into this match without any political influence, without any creative say, and see whether or not legitimately Mercedes can win. Can basically come out on top without anybody being in her back pocket, if you will. So to me, the story is there. The story is there, just as I explained, and they can elevate on that if they wanted to. But again, when it comes to AEW and AEW, this is where the fans, the sickos, the diehards, if you will, of not just AEW but wrestling in general, have to understand that if you're going to have a wrestling company on a major platform like TBS, TNT, HBO Max, you name it, you need to have more than just pro wrestling. I get you want to make pro wrestling legitimate as a sport again, and that's fine. But you need to understand that if you're going to legitimize it as a sport, you also have to tap in to what made it what it is, and that's basically the storytelling. The storytelling is what puts it, over the top and helps your company get put over that top, or put over that, rung that it's always falling over, if you know what I mean. So people need to understand that. They need to understand that you can't have things like, a free match, on your 0 hour, on your tailgate show, your pre-show, bleed into the pay-per-view, like FTR and Jet Speed did. You can't have that happen. You can't have technical difficulties all across the board, from Prime Video to Comcast, if you will, Xfinity, costing people, the opportunity to watch the event because of, either something on your end or their end. You can't allow that to happen. That doesn't make you look good. And that's my phone going off right now with notifications. I do apologize. But you can't let that happen. And also, you can't just decide at the end of your main event, when you can't just decide to abruptly, close out the show just like that, when you have your main event come to an end in a way that, people didn't expect was going to be that way. They expected, hey, you have Darby Allin, John Moxley, they're going to go out and kill each other, they're going to go out and do this and that. And there were signs that they were going to do that, but then the way it ends, it just ends on, Darby putting, John in the Scorpion Deathlock, if you will, in a broken, in a puddle, of water in the ring that's surrounded by broken glass from the aquarium that Sting shattered with his bat and everything. Basically people looked at that and they're like, really, that's how it's going to end? John's just, locked in the Scorpion Deathlock and he's squirming around in the water and the glass and, he's saying, yes, I quit. Now, they could explain that the glass was getting into his chest and he didn't want the pain anymore. So he's like, yes, I'll quit. We don't know. They need to explain that, because what people expected and, looked at is it was going to be more crazier, not so simplified. But I think the reason, in my opinion, that, the excuse they'll give and people will give is Sting was there. And Sting, even though he's done some hardcore crap in his day as well, and even took part of it somewhat in AEW, but mostly like in TNA and even WCW, even though he took, part in a lot of that stuff, he's not really, he's not really for it. Like, he'll respect Darby for wanting to do it, but, out of respect to Sting, Darby's like, yeah, let's not do that. Let's get crazy, but when Sting shows up, let's just end it in a way that's more traditional to him, more respectful to him. And that's a good idea if you want to do that. That's a good idea if you want to do that, but still, it did kind of sour people's expectations. And again, and in a way it went off the air abruptly. It's like, okay, this is, it's like, okay, that was unexpected how it ended, and abruptly ending and going off the air like that. It's like, okay, this is not a good look for AEW, because the way they started the pay-per-view and the way they abruptly ended it, it's like, whatever. And then again, you have people complaining, the technical difficulties with, not just Comcast Xfinity, but with Prime Video. Some, I think, are saying Prime Video cut off the feed, mid-match during Darby Allin and Moxley. They basically, Prime Video, I think that's who it was, pulled a DDP Goldberg thing from Halloween Havoc 1998. So obviously, to make up for it, I guess, Tony Khan likes to take influence from WCW. He's going to have to show the match in full on Wednesday, if that's the case. But all in all, Wrestle Dream, it had to be, the Wrestle Dream, outside of the 3 matches, from what I understand, was nothing more than a glorified, Dynamite and Collision that, honestly, you could have skipped Wrestle Dream this year. You don't always have to have a pay-per-view every month, if you will, if you're someone like AEW. If you want to show you're an alternative, skip 1 month a year. Like, every other year, do Wrestle Dream, or every other year, do it All In, or every other year, do a Double or Nothing, or whatever, but then skip the next year so you can have time to build towards your stories. And I think that's what's hurting them. Now, some people might say, well, WWE does the same thing. WWE, the difference with them is they understand they're not just a pro wrestling company, but they're entertainment. And that pro wrestling is like the centerpiece, for them, for the stories and everything to be told, be told around and everything. And you could see that. You could see that. But anyway, long story short, in closing, guys, AEW, again, as I've alluded to a lot, and everybody else has, they have the potential. That potential is there. And if they want to make 2026 their year and not make excuses and say, oh, 2025 is our greatest year, 2025 is not the best year. It is far from it. We do, depending, no matter what Tony Khan says or not, excuse me, it's far from it. But excuse me. But if they truly want to make next year their year, like they want to truly get people like JD and Alex Hicks, just Alex and Solomon and all of them on their side, if they truly want that to happen, then they need to fix a lot of the mistakes they've made this year. They need to one, focus on the storytelling. Two, make sure that when they do a pre-show, that no matches that they have on there bleed into the next hour. Do a time limit draw if you have to, or basically say with TV time remaining and everything, go with that. And also basically make sure that any technical difficulties you're going to have, with the with your pay-per-view PLE providers is resolved before you put the show on the air. So those are just a few of the things they need to work on. But yeah, Wrestle Dream, all it was a 3-match card, and honestly, it's just one of those situations to where, again, AEW needs to fix these things, and whether they want to admit it or not, the diehards, the sickos, the hardcores, I think they know it. Because, like I said, in my audio video on the Mercedes thing, even they, and I saw this online, even they are getting sick and tired of the whole Mercedes getting all these championship things. For what reason? Even and by them acting that way, you could tell you could tell, in my opinion, from my point of view, that they're already kind of understanding why people are critical about the AEW product, and they know out of all people that it should be in a better position than where it's in right now. But that's all I'm going to say, guys. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. And like I said at the beginning, do me a solid favor. Like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, and share the video, and click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere, as well as to support me in the various places you can. And super thanks will be open as soon as this video premiere ends. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are. And until next time, I am out. God bless. Take care. I'm out.